Welcome to the Talking Precision Medicine podcast, brought to you by Genialis. I'm your host, Raphael Rosengarten, CEO and co-founder of Genialis. On this podcast, we discuss the future of healthcare and health technology, and how advances in data and data science are fueling the next industrial revolution. Please subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And for more information on Genialis and our unique approach to AI-driven precision medicine, please visit our website at www.genialis.com. That's www.genialis.com. Now, on to the show. Thanks for joining, everyone. Today, I've got two very special guests. Anna Berkenblit, who's the Chief Scientific and Medical Officer of the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, and Sudheer Doss, who's the Chief Business Officer of PanCAN. It's really my pleasure to welcome you both. Let's jump right into it. I'll let you guys draw straws. Tell me about the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network. What is PanCAN and what's its mission?
Happy to, Raphael. Thanks so much for having us today. So, PanCAN, or the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, has been around for 25 years, and we are the leading organization dedicated to advancing progress against pancreatic cancer. We empower patients and caregivers with the resources and knowledge that they need to advocate for the care that they deserve. And we're pioneering the advancement of an early detection strategy for pancreatic cancer and revolutionizing the development of advanced and personalized treatments. We're building and mobilizing the pancreatic cancer field to ensure better outcomes for all who face pancreatic cancer today and those who are going to be fighting it tomorrow.
That sounds very comprehensive. Sudhir, do you want to pile on a little bit and give us your perspective on sort of the challenges and opportunities that PanCAN can help address in the pancreatic cancer space?
Yeah, thanks for having us, Raphael. I think the challenges that face us and the field in general are pretty multifaceted. I mean, it starts with even just the fundamental disease biology, the nature of the tumor that we're dealing with here, the fibrotic nature and the complexity of the tumor microenvironment and how it interacts with the tumor. Has largely prevented effective treatment strategies in the past. From an early detection perspective, we still don't have a widely used screening or surveillance methodology. And many of the early symptoms that our patients experience are just common symptoms of getting old. Things like back pain, indigestion, etc. From a therapeutic perspective, until relatively recently, we haven't had a whole lot of targeted therapies, and those that have been approved have been for really a small percentage of patients. Now, we're all pretty excited of the emergence of these KRAS-targeted therapies that we hope will change all that, but to date, we've had a bunch of small wins. And then, just I think the overall awareness around pancreas cancer is lacking out in the general community, especially in comparison to other high mortality cancers. So I think, the challenges are multifaceted in this field, but as you suggested in your question, they do present us with opportunities for advancement as well.
Yeah, so if I could just add on to what Sudhir was saying about some of the challenges, as a medical oncologist, I've just been so impressed with the advances that we've seen in other tumor types. Lung cancer, melanoma, colorectal, breast, they are being treated now so differently than they were when I was taking care of patients over 20 years ago. And unfortunately, for pancreatic cancer patients, they're still getting variations on the theme of the same chemo that I used to give, and that's just really not acceptable. So I think the challenges there for pancreatic cancer are kind of to catch up with the rest of the field, if you will. The other thing that I would say is that pancreatic cancer just kind of gets the short end of the stick from a research funding perspective. The other cancers out there, breast cancer, colorectal, prostate, lung, they get so much more funding than pancreatic cancer does. I think one of the challenges is to make sure that we continue to dedicate resources for research funding for pancreatic cancer. And I think a challenge we're facing right now, along with the rest of our country, is the drastic cuts that have occurred to research funding and, the changes within the regulatory environment in the federal government. So lots of challenges, but lots of opportunities, as Sudhir mentioned.
On the note of funding, not to pile on too much, but in industry, funding I think remains a challenge for companies targeting, any types of, I'll just call them patient solutions that are narrowly focused on pancreatic cancer. I think in the therapeutics domain, some investors are still a bit gun shy due to a multitude of late stage failures. So that's an area that PanCAN is really looking to help in any way we can as well, but remains a challenge as well, I think.
Well, it sounds like you've got quite a remit, and I want to just say back to you some of the topics that you've already raised that maybe we can touch on in more detail. So there's the sort of biology of pancreatic cancer that makes it kind of unique and historically recalcitrant. And I'd love to dive into that some more. It would be interesting to get your take on the emerging paradigms for trying, either novel therapeutics or established therapeutics that aren't necessarily indicated for pancreatic cancer. Just how that actually works and how PanCAN thinks about maybe de-risking that a bit. And then, Sudhir, you touched on both challenges and opportunities in the diagnostic space for early detection and screening, but also for indicating, again, existing drugs like the KRAS therapeutics for certain patients. There are clearly opportunities for new therapeutics that would be targeted there. And then I'm really keen to get into sort of the awareness and education piece. I mean, I'm getting older. I've got indigestion and back pain, as you suggest, right? So how PanCAN plays a role in sort of patient and family and physician education will be interesting. I don't know. I'm happy to dive in anywhere, but maybe I can lead with the question. Give us some numbers. What are the incident rates and who does this disease affect? How many new diagnoses? How many deaths do we see each year? What's the survival rate? Just kind of paint the portrait for us of the typical pancreatic cancer patient.
Yeah, Raphael, the unfortunate thing is that pancreatic cancer is one of the toughest cancers. Over 66,000 patients will be diagnosed with pancreatic cancer this year in the US, and over 50,000 will die of pancreatic cancer this year. And so, unfortunately, it's right now the third leading cause of cancer deaths in the US, and we're on track to become the second leading cause of cancer death by 2030. The second leading cause of cancer deaths. I mean, that is just not acceptable. And if you talk about, an individual patient's risk, the 5-year relative survival for a patient with pancreatic cancer is 13%. 13%. It's the only major tumor that has a 5-year survival less than 20%. And unfortunately, over half of patients who are diagnosed with pancreatic cancer are diagnosed with metastatic disease. And that's why we have to do better at early detection strategies, which we will get into later. Only about 14 or 15% of patients are diagnosed with localized disease, and those are the ones who are going to do best with surgery. Those are the ones who will have, on average, a 44% 5-year survival. So we've got to shift the diagnosis to earlier stage when patients are appropriate for surgery, because those are the patients who are going to have the best long-term outcomes.
Yeah, that sounds bleak, but also super important. Before we get into some of the more detailed topics, maybe I could ask each of you in turn, what drew you to work in this particular field, in this particular organization? Maybe you both just really like, marching uphill, but it sounds like a really tough fight.
So I'll go first, and then Sudhir, you've been at PanCAN longer. You can talk about what brought you to PanCAN. But for me, Raphael, I was taking care of patients, running a phase 1 program early in my career, and really figured out that I wanted to be one of the folks who decides how drugs get developed. And so for about 20 years, I worked in large pharma and biotech, developing drugs for cancer patients. And again, I've seen amazing, amazing progress. My last role, I was chief medical officer at a company that got a drug approved for ovarian cancer, which frankly was kind of in the same place that pancreatic cancer is now when I started, because when I started working on the ovarian cancer drug, it was the same chemotherapies that I was giving 20 years ago. And so now we've made progress in ovarian cancer, which is a more chemosensitive tumor. And now pancreatic cancer is the one bringing up the rear. And so I'm so motivated to help not just one patient at a time, one drug at a time, one company at a time, but to help all pancreatic cancer patients, and think about helping them in a variety of different ways, from supporting them through our patient services program, navigating their journey, to supporting research, to connecting people in the field and the ecosystem to accelerate advances. And I think PanCAN has a unique role in the ecosystem that creates incredible value and has the potential to accelerate progress for patients. What about you, Sudhir?
Yeah, so my path to PanCAN is an interesting one. In my past life, I was doing strategy consulting, and PanCAN was actually a client of mine. I was brought in to do a data and analytics project as we generate a lot of patient data from many of our programs. And then in my, I think it was close to 6 months at PanCAN, I just, fell in love with the organization. And to me, I've been working in healthcare my whole career, but this was a great opportunity to really get closer to the patient. We get the phenomenal opportunity to interact with patients very often. And it just keeps the motivation fresh and the purpose fresh in your head when you're talking to people, hearing stories, talking to their families. So that was certainly a big motivational aspect. The second part is PanCAN was on the brink of doing some really innovative things. And I'm not talking about things that no other patient advocacy organization was doing, but things that nobody else was doing, including a first of its kind phase 3 adaptive platform trial. I saw that as an amazing and impactful project that I would have loved to be involved in at the time. We were, just outlined the data analytics strategy, which pointed to the future of AI and pulling together and aggregating all these data and making them available to researchers. There were really some cool projects that were coming up, which also motivated me to join PanCAN. So,
Frankly, there's a lot of either naivete or just ignorance on the part of what patient advocacy organizations do. And so this is revealing to me to think about PanCAN as a true driver of innovation in terms of clinical trial design, diagnostic development, therapeutic development. And Anna, you talked about you were in a biotech developing drugs, but you wanted to have a bigger impact in helping get those drugs to patients. So maybe I want to come back to diagnostics, but let's start with the therapeutics piece because we're here now. Tell me a little bit more about how PanCAN gets involved in clinical trials. What's the role there? How do you think about putting more than your finger on the scale? How do you think about tugging on the rope of drug development to get new medicines to patients?
Yeah, there's a couple ways that we do that, Raphael. One is that we've been doing it on our own with Precision Promise, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then the other is that we want to accelerate enrollment in potentially pivotal trials, potentially practice-changing trials, by raising awareness and by connecting patients with clinical trials. So let me start with Precision Promise. As you heard from Sudhir, it was a large, adaptive platform design trial, registrational intent, and it's been done in other tumor types. It's never been done in pancreatic cancer before, and we just presented the final results from the final arm at ASCO GI in January, and now I think the real learning is gonna begin, and what I mean by that, Raphael, is that we collected data on all of the patients who were enrolled, not just data for the, primary and secondary outcomes, but tumor tissue. We had post-treatment biopsies on patients. We had serial blood tests on patients. We have next generation sequencing, DNA sequencing, RNA sequencing. We have digital images of pathology. We have CT scans. We have Fitbit data for activity. We have so much data for these patients. And what we're going to do with that is we're going to share the data and the samples with the research community. That makes this an incredible treasure trove of data for the field to learn from. And as you know, most companies are not in a position to share their data with external researchers. So the data set that we have from this trial is incredibly valuable. We enrolled over 460 patients. They received either control chemotherapy, including standard of care gemcitabine and Abraxane, or modified FOLFIRINOX. And then there were several experimental arms that were included as well. And so we're in the process of getting the data ready and the samples ready to share with the research community later this year. And I think that's going to accelerate progress in a way that, nobody else can do. So that's the first piece. The second piece of how we really accelerate drug development is by encouraging patients to enroll on clinical trials. And that's hard, right? Clinicaltrials.gov is not an easy website for patients or physicians to navigate. So we have our own clinical trial finder that is really bespoke. We talk with individual sites, we talk with companies. Companies come in and do in-services to educate our case managers who talk to patients. We make sure we understand the eligibility. We figure out which sites are enrolling. We connect patients to sites. And again, if we can accelerate the development of one drug by 1 year, that has the potential to impact thousands of patients. So these are the key ways that we really foster drug development and accelerate progress. Sudhir, I'm sure you have additional insights there that you want to share.
Yeah, I'll just first double down on what you said, Anna, about the data and samples. We've generated a fair amount of unique data, and I think it's increasingly valuable as, the emerging tech bio field takes hold and in AI drug discovery and development. But a couple of other ways I think we catalyze drug discovery and development is one, we put in place a mechanism called our Therapeutic Accelerator Award a few years ago. And while that award is not currently active and is sort of in a state of evolution, I think it represented a landmark for PanCAN as we transition from primarily funding, academic researchers to exploring what funding industry could lead to. Those were collaborative awards and resulted in, up to $5 million in non-dilutive funding at the time. So really helped companies pull their pancreas cancer programs forward on their roadmap and accelerate that development. The other role that we frequently play is one of a connector in the field that I think, maybe the impact is less measurable there, but whether it's connecting companies to data, companies to samples, companies to investors, companies to strategics or other like-minded companies, we do play that role quite a bit and try and keep our finger on the pulse of any and all companies that are, developing products for this field.
And I can speak to that and probably owe our listeners a bit of transparency. Genialis has a collaboration and business agreement in place with PanCAN to do just what Sudhir is describing, where we get certain data access to develop diagnostic algorithms for pancreatic cancer. And so far, it's been incredibly wonderful and fruitful collaboration. So if you are a company interested in accessing these data to help in the fight, I think Sudhir is probably your man to discuss ways of doing that. But maybe, Sudhir, you could preface that and just give a sense for what are some of the collaboration modalities that have worked? You've mentioned the accelerator award and the connectors, but with companies like Genialis or others, how do you see creating sort of win-win agreements in the space?
Yeah, what I think has been pretty amazing is to date, we've primarily been collaborating with data from our Know Your Tumor program. It's real world data. It's, molecular profiling, that's genomic and RNA-seq, along with some somewhat limited clinical data. But just with that data set, which is, up to about 750 patients, just with that data set, we've been able to put in partnerships that really cross the healthcare value chain. So we have, target discovery partnerships in place. We have drug discovery partnerships in place where they marry up that data with some proprietary, compound library related molecular data in order to discover new lead assets, lead compounds, all the way through to looking at path imaging data to identify molecular phenotypes in the healthcare delivery setting. So it's really been a pretty broad diversity of collaborations just on this one data set. And that's why we're so excited about making the Precision Promise data set available. We think that opens up a whole new host of use cases. The data is much more robust, collected per protocol in a phase 3 controlled environment, not real world data, longitudinal in nature, 2 time points for molecular profiling. We just think it opens up a number of additional collaborative opportunities.
That sounds absolutely fascinating. And at least in Genialis's hands, when we've had the opportunity to get even 2 time point longitudinal samples from these sorts of studies, our molecular tools or molecular analytics tools allow us to then really understand the evolution of a tumor under different therapeutic regimen, which I think is super important for complex diseases like this when you have to think about possible combination approaches or smart sequencing of drugs to really get at the tumor. I want to take a moment to mention that Genialis is committed to the same mission as Anna, Sudheer, and the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network. In fact, we are formally partnered with PanCAN to build better and more accurate diagnostic algorithms to guide the development and indication of KRAS inhibitors for this disease. Pancreatic cancer is just one front on which we are developing smarter tools to help patients get the right treatments faster. Want to learn more? Genialis will be at the AACR annual meeting in Chicago from April 25th to the 30th, presenting new data and real-world use cases of our groundbreaking algorithm KRAS ID, powered by the Genialis supermodel. The supermodel is the world's first large molecular model of cancer biology that extracts insights from RNA-seq data to deliver therapeutic intelligence to drug developers and oncologists. Stop by on April 28 from 2 to 5 p.m. when we'll present two posters. One, leveraging the Genialis supermodel to predict responses in KRAS-mutated cancers, and another on a machine learning biomarker for a WEE1 inhibitor developed with Debiopharm. If you're attending the meeting or not, visit genialis.com to schedule a meeting. Thanks, and now back to the conversation. Let's talk more about the drugs that are available. So, Anna, you've described to us kind of a standard of care chemo. And of course, we now have KRAS inhibitors as an option. As of this reporting, there are none yet approved in pancreatic cancer, but I think that'll change. Tell us a bit about KRAS, but also the rest of the landscape for promising therapeutics you see coming down the pike.
Yeah, I'm super excited about RAS inhibitors for pancreatic cancer. As you know, there's already a couple on the market there specifically for the G12C mutation that is common or more common in lung cancer and colorectal cancer. Unfortunately, only about 1% of pancreatic cancer patients have that specific mutation, but over 90% of pancreatic cancer patients have a KRAS mutation, over 90%. So the potential for KRAS inhibitors is tremendous in pancreatic cancer. And I'm so excited that the first phase 3 trial of a pan-KRAS on inhibitor is enrolling in pancreatic cancer now. Revolution Medicines RMC 6236 is enrolling currently. And I'm really excited that hopefully will be the first drug to make it over the finish line in pancreatic cancer, and that will open the door for the 30, 40, 50 KRAS inhibitors that are in development behind it, and will open the door for all sorts of combinations. And what I'm really excited about is thanks to heavy investing by the National Cancer Institute, their RAS initiative over the past decade or so, that has led to a lot of science around RAS inhibitors so that we now know it's gone from an undruggable target to a druggable target to rational combinations that will be driven by data instead of in the olden days when we did empiric combinations because we could. Now there's strong data to combine RAS inhibitors with chemotherapy and even with immunotherapy approaches. So I'm super excited about RAS inhibitors. And just to put a little light on the impact that PanCAN has had in this field, we have invested over $17 million in grants that have been related to the development of RAS as a therapeutic target. We've given out 45 grants to 39 investigators, including Dave Tuvison's model, his mouse model of KRAS pancreatic cancer back in 2003. And then after that, in 2010, we started funding specific studies involving RAS inhibitors. They've included up to 5 different RAS inhibitors. We've funded several early investigator career grants focused on RAS as well. And so I'm really proud to have joined an organization that has contributed so profoundly to this advance, because I do think RAS inhibitors are going to change the treatment paradigm, starting with metastatic disease, moving up into earlier lines of therapy, potentially even preventive with a vaccine, because RAS mutations are very early in the development and progression of pancreatic cancer.
I think, in addition to our obvious excitement with the potential for impact on our patients, also excited just about the uptick in industry activity in pancreatic cancer drug development. I think what we might see here is sort of a rising tide lifting all boats type scenario. So at our last count, we were approaching 60 assets between allele specific and pan-KRAS assets out there with pancreatic cancer as a potential indication. And what we're seeing is some big pharma who have long avoided or have not been investing in pancreatic cancer getting back into the field. If some of those assets make it to market and you get, investment from big pharma in building out that aspect of their commercial enterprise, then they're more likely to invest in other pancreatic cancer assets. So I think it's overall just been great for the field. I'm looking forward to seeing some of these hit the market.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Raphael, if I could keep riffing a little bit on targeted therapy for pancreatic cancer, because as much as RAS is incredibly important for pancreatic cancer, RAS mutations are not the only mutations in pancreatic cancer, and I don't want that to be lost because patients with other mutations can definitely benefit from targeted therapies for pancreatic cancer. Unfortunately, it's smaller percentages of the overall population, but we know that people with pancreatic cancer have BRCA mutations, and so olaparib, as an example, is approved as maintenance therapy. And then there's other mutations, RAF, NTRK, NRG1. There's a small subset of pancreatic cancer patients who have microsatellite instability, so a checkpoint inhibitor will work potentially for them. And one of the unique roles of being a patient advocacy organization is we educate patients about all of their treatment options. And one of the things that we've seen is that there are several tumor agnostic approvals that include pancreatic cancer, but the drugs are not specifically approved for pancreatic cancer. And because it's a small percentage of pancreatic cancer patients with those mutations, there's not a lot of pharma investment in advertising. And so the awareness is low. And that's where PanCAN can really step in and make a difference.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we were talking about targeted therapies by way of these various mutations, and we obviously there are a lot of flavors of RAS inhibitors today. It's part of what Genialis is trying to do with our KRAS ID algorithm suite is to develop biomarkers that actually let you know which of the various RAS mechanisms are most likely to succeed for a given patient, and whether they should be staged. But you mentioned BRCA and others. Good news is we've got biomarkers for a lot of these things, and we could debate whether genetic mutation as a biomarker is sufficient or whether we should be doing something that's a little bit more phenotypic. But nevertheless, for this menu of targeted therapies, patients need to get screened. So maybe we can shift gears and talk a bit about that. Now, there's a difference between screening at the time when you are finally diagnosed with the disease to indicate a therapy, and then, of course, early detection screening. So maybe we can start with the former case, which is you finally present symptoms, you come in, you're sick, and you need to be treated. What currently is kind of the state of the art, the standard of care for biomarker screening for precision medicine approaches to pancreatic cancer?
Well, PanCAN recommends that all patients with pancreatic cancer get their tumor molecularly profiled exactly for that reason, Raphael. It impacts their treatment options as well as their clinical trial options. And so molecular testing can be done at an academic center based on their algorithms, or there's multiple companies out there who also do the testing. And it can be genomic testing. RNA-seq testing is really important as well because of the importance of fusions like NRG1 and NTRK that really require RNA-seq. And unfortunately, some patients, when they get a biopsy taken, the pancreas is in a tricky spot. Liver metastases are often biopsied, and that can be tricky as well. Sometimes there just isn't enough tissue taken for RNA-seq, so it can be a challenge. So number one is you got to get the tissue. Number two is you've got to do the biomarker testing. And then number three is you have to know how to interpret the results. You can't see something if it's not on the panel. So you have to make sure that the panel has all of the mutations that are listed in the NCCN guidelines, as an example. NCCN guidelines, indicate that patients with pancreatic cancer need to have their tumor tested, and the mutations are listed there. And PanCAN was really responsible for generating the data from that Know Your Tumor data set that influenced NCCN to update their guidelines, now requiring molecular testing for patients with pancreatic cancer.
Yeah, I am very biased. We at Genialis prefer RNA sequencing over most other analytes because it has all the relevant genetic information, at least from the coding regions, plus all the phenotypic information from the cell state, it occurs to me that platform that is using RNA sequencing could give you a simultaneous readout about all of these mutation statuses, as well as the pathway activation status, as well as the degree of fibrosis in the tumor microenvironment, right? Which would be, you had mentioned earlier the MSI subset of patients. Well, I would love to give them a checkpoint inhibitor, but it may or may not be able to even get to the tumor, right? So these are things that I think that an appropriately comprehensive panel could potentially solve.
Fair enough.
What's being done, Sudhir, of the early detection? This was kind of where we started, and patients who get picked out early are going to have a much better prognosis. What sort of tools are available for that, and how does PanCAN move into that patient education?
Yeah, maybe I can start a little bit about, what we're seeing out there, in the market, and then Anna can weigh in a little bit about, some of the things that we've been doing. The way I see it, the innovation for early detection is alive and well. We're seeing companies coming to us with new machine learning based methods to look at, radiology images early on, pre-diagnostic or early stage. Lots of new methods being developed up there, applying AI machine learning to blood-based biomarkers as well as urine-based biomarkers. So we do see quite a bit of innovation actually. Last time we looked at, what all is out there between multi-cancer detection approaches and pancreatic cancer specific, there was over 20 that were somewhere in development. But where I think some of the challenges remain, Raphael, is in later in development, in the commercialization of these technologies, really the economic models, funding the evidence generation required to establish clinical utility, to establish the health economics, and getting the reimbursement across, the fragmented payer landscape. All of those, I think, still present real issues to industry to bring some of that innovation over the finish line and make it available to patients more broadly.
Yeah, and if I can add a little color in terms of the unmet need and the challenges, pancreatic cancer is the only major solid tumor that doesn't have an approved screening strategy. Breast does, lung cancer does, colon cancer does, cervical cancer does. And pancreatic cancer, part of the problem is just it's a low frequency cancer. So it doesn't make sense to screen the general population. And so you really have to focus on those who are at higher risk. And the process to take a test and validate it and then focus it on the right population and generate sufficient evidence, as Sudhir was talking about, to get reimbursement that's a big hill to climb. But I'm hopeful, as Sudhir mentioned, that there's a lot of companies working on it, and I'm hopeful that one, if not more, will make it over the finish line.
And are tests like the Grail Gallery test for things like pancreas? I'm coming from a place of not having followed the studies recently enough to know.
Yeah, yeah. I hope that Grail makes it over the finish line because that will be a paradigm shift. We will move from screening for one cancer at a time to screening for cancer, period. I mean, if you look at the data sets that have been generated from Grail already, the problem is pancreatic cancer is just not that common. And so, you may pick up one here, you may pick up one there, but we don't nearly have enough, high enough level of evidence, again, to support deploying that in the general population for pancreatic cancer. And so it may turn out that we may have multiple ways to screen for cancers. But I do hope that something like Grail, if you could move to a blood test once a year, that would be a whole lot easier than having to, do a clean out for a colonoscopy, go in for a mammogram, get a CT scan if you have a history of smoking. So Grail could change the paradigm. But at PanCAN, we're a little bit like the Boy Scouts, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. We're really focused on ensuring that all the folks who are developing potential ways to screen for earlier detection, that they get the resources that they need, because we don't know yet who's going to make it over the finish line.
Let's imagine there was a more kind of routine way to do it. When would be the right time?
So pancreatic cancer is a disease of older people, and I'm in that category now. So there are no recommendations, right, for screening in the general population. About 15 to 20% of pancreatic cancers have a genetic predisposition, if you will. There are family histories of pancreatic cancer where we don't yet know what the genetic mutation is. And then there's others where we do know the genetic mutation. So if somebody has pancreatic cancer, they need actually to be genetically tested. That's in the NCCN guidelines. And then if they do have a mutation that we know enough about, that increases their risk of pancreatic cancer, their family members need to be screened. And then those people will be put into, hopefully, into programs for surveillance. So surveillance for people who are at high risk makes a whole lot of sense. But there is no one national consensus guideline, and that makes it challenging. Each institution kind of has their own algorithm, and then how to screen, is it a CT? Is it an MRCP? Is it an EUS, an endoscopic ultrasound? How often? So there's a lot of practice pattern variation, and I think that's something that the field struggles with. And PanCAN, we're trying to figure out what we can do to bring everybody together on that as well.
I just wanted to add something on the MCEDs, as Anna suggested. We're excited to see how that's going to turn out, and it could be game changing. But I think the MCEDs, and particularly Grail's approach, could address one commercialization issue that we didn't touch on, which is this. It's one of these kind of last mile issues, which is okay. So now that it's approved, a new screening approach or early detection approach for pancreatic cancer, how do you get people to actually go do it? Existing screening procedures that are completely non-invasive, the adherence to those are still lower than what we would like. And I think the MCED may somewhat address this because, your ordinary person walking around might be more likely to say, hey, if I can get one test and test for all cancers, that's pretty compelling, versus getting them concerned enough about their risk for pancreatic cancer specifically, which is a huge lift. It's something that we at PanCAN work on every day, raising awareness about risk factors, raising awareness about symptoms. But I think it could help when you have a test that really has the opportunity to give you a result across all cancers to compel the general public to get tested.
I'd love to dive in a little bit more about the specifics of how you engage with patients, and sort of maybe we could just ground it in some examples of what are some like campaigns or programs or activities where patients have actually kind of rolled up their sleeves and gotten involved with PanCAN to do whatever. It could be, educating other patients, or maybe it's policy and advocacy type work. Help make this concrete for us.
Yeah, so there are many different ways that patients can interact with PanCAN and become part of the PanCAN community. The first way I will just point out is this is April. Purple Stride is our community event that occurs on April 26th this year at nearly 60 different locations throughout the country. Purple Stride is our annual fundraiser where we do raise a significant portion of our operating expenses. And so that is a great way to build community. Building community is one of the pillars of PanCAN. And so patients and survivors and caregivers come out, and it's a wonderful way to feel part of the community that's been touched by pancreatic cancer, because as a patient and as a caregiver, it can be very isolating to go through this. It's a scary diagnosis and it's a difficult illness trajectory. And caregivers, they have a big burden on their shoulders. So to meet other people who've gone down the same journey is incredibly empowering for patients and caregivers. So that's one way. In the past, PanCAN also has had what we called Advocacy Day, and I look forward to a future where we re-engage advocacy. During COVID, that kind of took a hit, to be honest. In-person things were impossible, but I think we're poised now to re-engage our Advocacy Day. In the past, we would have hundreds of people go to Washington, D.C. and talk with their legislators to really increase federal appropriations for pancreatic cancer funding. And we've been wildly successful at that. I think the best example is the funding that we helped ensure through the Department of Defense. This past year, it was $15 million dedicated to pancreatic cancer research. Right now, things are a little bit in flux due to recent changes within the administration, but I'm hopeful that we will continue. And advocacy is more important now than ever to make sure that pancreatic cancer gets the funding that it needs. Do you want to talk, Raphael, a little bit about what it's like for patients to engage with our patient services program and how they get help sort of every step of the way? Is that part of what you were thinking?
That was exactly where I was going to go next. Sort of put it through the patient lens a little bit.
So we have highly trained case managers who are trained to basically walk with a patient through their journey every step of the way. When patients or caregivers call patient services, they get a dedicated case manager who will be the same person that they interact with when they call back as their situation changes. And case managers can help people understand what's a pancreas. Many people don't even know what a pancreas is. So that we can start with what's a pancreas, what's pancreatic cancer, and then where should I get treated? PanCAN really advises patients to be treated at high volume centers. And so we have a physician database that covers gastroenterologists, medical oncologists, surgeons, radiation oncologists, and can really help patients find care close to their home at centers of excellence, if you will. So that's really important. And then we also encourage patients to consider clinical trial participation. And as I mentioned before, we have an excellent clinical trial finder program that is really quite bespoke for pancreatic cancer, helping match patients to appropriate clinical trials. So, those are some of the ways that patients can interact with us and caregivers as well. We also have wonderful resources for diet and nutrition, for supportive care, hospice, all of the things that you can think about. We have the resources, so we encourage patients and caregivers to give us a call. And they will give back to the community in the sense that we've had a patient registry where patients agree to provide additional information that then we can use as we really think about making sure we understand the unmet needs and to help us understand what additional services patients need.
That's hugely helpful, and I hope that we can reach some of the listenership for this episode will be patients and families of patients who would benefit from this information. I want to be mindful of your time today and maybe steer us to the question I tend to ask every guest at the end, which is, if we all do our jobs right, Pancreatic Cancer Action Network has the impact that you two are working so hard to achieve. What does it look like in 10 years? What is the landscape of diagnostics and therapy and patient care a decade from now?
I'll go first, and then Sudhir, I'm curious where your head will go, but I would love to see 10 years from now, the majority of pancreatic cancer patients diagnosed with localized disease that is surgically resectable, and with adjuvant therapy, the majority of pancreatic cancer patients being cured. That's what I would love to see. And for the minority of patients who are still being diagnosed in the future with metastatic disease, I would love to see them live with their cancer for a long period of time on tolerable therapies sequentially, one after the other, that do not negatively impact their quality of life so that they can really thrive and live with their cancer. So that's what I hope. If I'm really being hopeful, I would love to see a vaccine that could prevent pancreatic cancer in people that we know are at risk for the disease based on their inherited genetic makeup. What about you, Sudhir?
What we're seeing now as far as the pace of innovation is just incredible, and it seems to be continuing to accelerate. So for me, I think 10 years from now, there's no doubt that AI, machine learning, will completely change the face of healthcare. I mean, I think in all facets, from drug discovery, drug development, through healthcare delivery. I think we're still in the relatively early stages. I think there's been several proof points on how some of these new approaches can help us accelerate drug discovery and development. I think the jury's still out on how we get the right approaches that increase our PTRS, or probability of technical and regulatory success in drug development. And that will be when the game changer happens. Just to give a few examples, I think maybe 10 years from now, we will have an integrated approach for drug discovery that not only takes into account the depths of the disease biology, but ties it into clinical success and brings that forward. So now we're designing drugs and developing drugs that have a higher likelihood of success in the clinic. I think drug development and clinical development will be fundamentally different. from the way that we design studies, simulate studies, the way we identify patients, define patients, and enroll them, to even, might I suggest that the data requirements and analysis and the regulators will come along for the ride. And I think the burden of evidence and the nature of that evidence will shift. In healthcare delivery, I think there'll be huge changes. And as we talked a little bit about earlier, I think some of those first changes will be in interpretation of imaging, whether it be in radiology, but also pathology images. We've seen some great examples of new approaches to interpreting pathology images into molecular phenotypes. And I think, those will be where some of the first advances are. But either way, the road will be very exciting. And I'm hopeful that, much like the rest of healthcare, the pancreatic cancer field will benefit from all these advances as well.
We can certainly all hope, but also more importantly, roll up our sleeves and try to do our part to make both of your visions come to fruition. Anna, Sudheer, thank you both for your time. This has been a fascinating conversation, and I really do look forward to continuing the good work we've started together. Thank you.
Thank you, Raphael.
Thank you.
This has been another episode of the Talking Precision Medicine podcast, brought to you by Genialis. Hopefully by now you've subscribed to the show, but if not, go ahead and click that subscribe button and leave us a review. And please do pay us a visit at www.genialis.com. That's www.genialis.com to learn more about how AI is transforming precision medicine. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.